I'm Pete Luban. I'm the head of information security and risk at Dimensional Fund Advisors. Dimensional Fund Advisors is an asset manager here in the wonderful city of Austin, Texas, with roughly 600 billion AUM. It's an interesting company. It's very deeply versed in science and mathematics. Our board is comprised of several Nobel Prize winners, and so everything here is very statistically driven and data driven. And it's a really great place to work. There's not a lot of shooting from the hip here. Everything is very data driven, and that's just kind of sort of type of guy I am. Anyway, let me share my my presentation with you here, and hopefully this all works as according to plan. Put it in presentation mode. All right, so topic du jour is assessing and qualifying security technology. Now, I mean, that sounds very formal. I think, those of us who are in the decision-making capacity in security, struggle constantly with how do we provide the level of capability that is expected of us, knowing that we're budget constrained and resource constrained. I think this is just the life of anybody in information security. And so I wanted to talk about a couple of things that are my philosophy. These are essentially the things I apply to how I make technology decisions, and how I make organizational decisions, how I make hiring decisions. It all sort of boils down into like what technologies I choose. Now, full disclaimer, I'm not here to endorse any specific technology. If I let a name of a product or whatever slip here and there, it's just because that's kind of what I'm doing at this point in time. And I'll get into more of the nuance around the concept of assessing and the concept of qualifying. But let's get into this. So I think we all know this, right? There is no silver bullet when it comes to security technology. There is no one solution, even though Microsoft will tell you differently, and so will Cisco, and so will Palo Alto, that there's no converged platform that makes it all go away. There's no magic solution to managing risk and reducing risk. I think, to me anyway, the real deal is the right tools in the right capable hands are at least a component of how one develops that magic risk reducer, if you will. And we'll go into the specifics. I would say there's no, again, my opinion, there's no wrong solution. There's no absolutely right solution. There is the solution that works for you. And there is a number of things I think you need to take into consideration to make a determination of what the right tools and services and capabilities are for you based on, like I said, a number of things. So that being said, let's move into it. So there's this relatively new concept that is rooted.
Sorry to stop your flow there, Pete. It doesn't seem like your slide is moving through the motions here. If you want to just double check that for me. It's still stuck on that first slide.
That's no good. You don't see my threat-informed defense slide?
No, we're just still on the first slide.
All right, something's hosed.
There we go. You're there.
All right. Well, I guess presentation mode doesn't want to do what's intended to do.
You're good. No worries. Keep going.
Over this. So this is a new phrase that we're using a whole bunch, but I think it's kind of rooted in lots of things we've always known, and I think this is a combination of risk management. It's a combination of threat intelligence, and it's a combination of the application of those things into a risk framework, and so on and so forth. And really what I'm trying to get at here is your capabilities, the things you do and the controls you manage, et cetera, are only as good as well as you are informed about risk. And as we all know, risk is not universally applicable. And so it's really about how risk applies to you. And when I say you, I mean you and your role, you and your organization, you and your industry. and the concept around how one understands or gets informed about threat, about risk, has everything to do with what you can see and what you know, and how you combine those things. And just to expand on that a little bit, you know, the approach I've always taken to security controls and security technology, and I realize I didn't really tell you very much about myself at the beginning of this, and perhaps I'll get to that later, is by establishing visibility. And what I mean by that is the data and the way you get access to it and the way you massage it and the way you look at it are really the entire picture of, as it relates to how you create that picture of threat. Now I know, you know, flashback a couple of years where, you know, the SIM space was starting to get super hot, and the data lake concept and all this other stuff, and this still happens depending on who you're dealing with, but you know, their whole thing was, just put everything there. You know, you put everything there and you hire somebody or people who know analytics and you derive analytics, and that essentially tells you what you need to know. I don't agree with that. I've never agreed with that. I still don't agree with that. You know, the approach that I take, you know, given the limited resources that I have, is to know what you want to see. And I think that is essentially one of the main tenets of being threat informed, is knowing what you have to worry about, like literally knowing the things that are gonna kill you in your sleep, so to speak, and deriving a visibility program that involves collecting the relevant data and putting it in a place that gives you the ability to apply the tools and the capabilities to manage that data in such a way where it actually tells you something. You know, any of us who've dealt with enterprise SIM or managed SIM or any of those things has had to struggle through, great, there's a giant mountain of data over there. Like, what do I actually do with it? How do I decipher any of it? How do I normalize any of it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the reason I say visibility and knowledge is because if I know what I care about, if I know what my targets are, and I know what data I have in the environment that actually applies to those targets, I can collect that data and massage that information in such a way where it either confirms or denies suspicions that I have. And the reason I put it that way is because being threat informed has a lot to do with data and science and intelligence, but it also has a lot to do with knowing your environment, knowing where your weak points are, knowing what the things are that keep you up at night, so to speak. And the combination of understanding that and the combination of developing that visibility is what gives you the ability to know where to concentrate as far as it relates to security controls and prevention and all that cool stuff. And so essentially that's what I mean by threat-informed defense. Now, getting all that data and producing all that visibility is great, especially if you've got it tuned to a point where it's providing you a signal that's actually transactable and you understand it, you do something about it, and don't need to spend time deciphering it. But at the end of the day, when something ugly occurs, you know, you need to do something about it. And that's kind of what brings me into my next bit, which is ROI. And I know that's nobody likes to talk about that, but I'll talk about it very briefly. But more importantly is team scale. So ROI, at least to me, and it's worked for me, and it works for me in my current environment, is to essentially say, well, if we go back to the concept of threat-informed defense, and I've got a good way to explain to my superiors and to the board and to whoever needs to hear it, hey, these are the things that I worry about, and therefore these are the things you should worry about. And I can come to the table and say, you know, if we can agree that those are the things that we worry about, then there are options. You know, we can live with the risk, we can do something about the risk, and if we decide to do something about the risk, we can do it in such a way where, you know, we do better than nothing, or we do our best to mitigate that risk. And within those options, we could talk about, you know, the price you pay to be able to get some level of maturity in your ability to reduce risk, you know, versus essentially the money you're shelling out for it in any given period of time. Now, the reason I'm kind of put this against or pair it up with team scale is, and once again, this is my philosophy, and I know there are plenty of people who don't agree with me, is that, and that's why I said it doesn't work for everyone, but to me, horizontal scaling doesn't necessarily work. And what I mean when I say horizontal scaling is, you know, you might have a SOC. You can just continually put people in that SOC, and you could just spread the workload out across that scale of individuals in that SOC, and you can feed them more data and give them more controls and more controls. And essentially all you're doing is just, you know, spreading a problem out. And the reason I choose not to horizontally scale, and the reason I choose, you know, threat-informed defense as an approach to the technology decisions that I make, is because I think in the long run, going back to ROI, it costs you a lot less to make the right technology choices and enable yourself through technology and services in such a way where the requirement to scale a team horizontally kind of sort of goes away. You know, I've got no problem saying, like, the team that I have at Dimensional, with a couple of resources that are incoming, is about 9 people, not including myself. And, you know, that's enough for a global organization with a total headcount somewhere in the 2,000 range, with all that money in the bank and so on and so forth. And, you know, we do a really good job because we make really, really smart technology decisions, you know, without just carbon copying operators or carbon copying engineers. You know, it has a lot to do with management style. It has to do a lot with essentially how you employ technology and the pace at which you do it. But I'm much more a fan of focusing on how to do what's right for your particular organization rather than just collecting people. That's my philosophy. So moving on. Now, if you're not going to horizontally scale a team and look for just, you know, sheer addition of horsepower based on human resource, we need to talk for a minute about maturity, and we need to talk quite a bit about capability. You can see my bullets here. If you don't have the skills, you can't pay the bills. And what I mean by that is, you know, I've been in organizations before where security was part of technology, where you look at infrastructure management and you look at application engineering and stuff like that, and you just see the headcount ask, you know, year after year is just, I need 30%, I need 40%, I need 50%, like whatever it is. And really all that is just spreading a workload around, you know, across potentially mediocre people. I know that sounds somewhat controversial, but I really believe it to be true. You know, a wise old billionaire once told me, hiring right is the most important thing you'll ever do, because the consequences of not hiring right are immeasurable. And I truly agree with that. And I would gladly trade off, you know, waiting for the right candidate to come by against that, you know, sort of collecting people thing. And so that's what I mean. If you don't have the skills, you can't pay the bills. Sure, you can make investments in people and you can grow people and you can get them trained up. But, you know, either way, you're trading off time against capability, and bringing maturity in is, I think, a better investment, a more, you know, has more potential as a strategy than knowing you need to upskill people when you hire them and so on and so forth. And obviously a book could be written about that argument. But now when we go into how maturity lines up with capability, you know, what I'm really talking about here is, and it says it in that bullet, like, don't buy the Ferrari when you need the VW, is this goes back to threat-informed defense. To me, if I know what I need to protect myself against and my organization against, I'm not going to let Microsoft or Cisco or, God forbid, FireEye come in and try and sell me, you know, the super multi-million-dollar converged platform that does all these amazing things, when I know I don't need most of those amazing things, or more importantly, I don't have the maturity on my team to leverage those super awesome things. You know, this is why we develop roadmaps. This is why we develop maturity models. This is why we tell the board and the CEOs, you know, this is where I am, you know, this is where I plan to be in this period of time, and ultimately speaking, this is where I want to be. You know I don't need to be a 10 on the CMMI. I don't need to be a world-class security organization. I need to have a security organization that can manage the risk that is relevant to this organization, and to the things we care about on a day-by-day basis. And so maturity and capability are really two sides of a scale. You know, they're not necessarily the same thing, but they are, you're weighing one against the other, or I should say, actually, it's somewhat linear, right? Your capability should grow at the pace that your maturity grows at, I guess, is at the end of the day what I'm getting at. So don't let those Microsofts come in there and tell you need E5, because you probably don't. My opinion. Moving on. So this is an interesting concept that I like to consider my brand, if you will. If you look me up on Medium, you'll see I wrote like a 7 or 8 part series on ecosystem engineering. Ecosystem engineering is more or less exactly what it sounds like. And we know what an ecosystem is, right? For life to thrive, your environment has moving parts that all sort of depend on one another. And if you move this thing, then you understand that that thing moves. And if you take away here, you have to add there, and so on and so forth. You know, I like to think of engineering and most sciences as sort of models of natural science. And that's essentially how I come to talk about an ecosystem engineering a bunch. Essentially what I'm saying is the parts come together to create some whole, right? And integration is essentially how you take from one place and give to another, and vice versa. You know, I mentioned automation in the slide. Automation is not necessarily just a cornerstone to ecosystem engineering. I mean, it obviously is, right? You're moving things around. It's the blood and the air and the water and the whatever it is. But automation also goes back to the threat-informed defense thing. It goes back to the ROI thing. It goes back to the capabilities thing. It goes back to the maturity thing. You know, I'd much rather, like I said, wait to find to hire the type of engineer that I know lives in, you know, the sort of SRE model, or in the automation and orchestration space, the SOAR world, like whatever it is. You know, because they have a vested interest in not inundating themselves with manual labor. And I'm a super lazy manager. I don't want to manage. I want people who figure it out. I think the essence of engineering is essentially that figuring it out, right? Like the intolerance of repeating the same thing over and over. And if you look and, you know, if you wind yourself up in an environment, or if you run an environment where essentially, you know, every day looks like the next day and all you're doing is doing the same thing over and over and over, you wind up in that trap of having to horizontally scale, because the demand will always increase and the resources may not always increase, and you wind up in a situation where that becomes unmanageable or that becomes untenable. And so I always put a focus on integration, automation, orchestration. I know SOAR is like a big buzz term in the industry now, but I mean, quite honestly, SOAR has been around since the concept of automation has been around. You know, maybe security was late to, well, I have my own philosophies on how that wind up becoming a buzz term in security. I mean, as we know, all these products are just trying to get your money by showing you the flashy slides and the cool interfaces and whatever. But, you know, I have no problem saying I invested in a SOAR platform. I used Demisto. I've used it for many, many years. I am not affiliated with them in any way, shape, or form. And I refuse to refer to it by its new name, since it was acquired by Palo Alto, which is XSOAR, which I think is a terrible name. But every vendor in the planet is going to send you a source system, a solution these days. To me, really, the tool, I'd rather make a tool selection based on catering it to the maturity and capability I have on the team in terms of human resources, rather than go buy the fancy, flashy thing and then, you know, forcing people to sort of change their own DNA to kind of fit into a new thing. And I think that is essentially part of the essence of ecosystem engineering. The set you free aspect of it is felt in almost every aspect of security engineering and operations, even outside security and operation and security operations and engineering, where I need to produce data to show my boss and I need to produce data to show the board. You know, I can code that out and have this thing produce reports and show me statistics and gather metrics and so on and so forth. And I think this is all just part of the machine, you know, all the moving parts coming together to represent some whole that produces not only what I need, but what the people that work for me need, and most importantly, what the organization needs, and that is ultimately the reduction of risk. And I'm happy to talk more about this if y'all want to reach out to me or email me or whatever it is, because it's something I do a lot of writing about, and it's something I'm very, very passionate about, because I truly think it is. If there was one most important slide in this presentation, I think this is it. And I could do a whole thing on ecosystem engineering, maybe perhaps someday I will. But moving on. Now this is where, the name of this presentation being assessing and qualifying. Qualification to me is whatever, right? Like there are a bazillion different ways I can qualify something. And really when you say qualifying, all I'm doing is trying to convince somebody that I was right. Validation is a completely different thing. Validation is essentially the way by which you have a way to know that the things you've invested in and the technologies you have and the people that you hired are actually effectively buying down your risk. And we do this through continuous validation, which, if you're in the CI/CD world, in the security space, you've probably heard of CV, which is continuous validation. I'll talk about that for a minute. And like I said in the last slide, the making pretty pictures for the board. I know, I'm trying to be funny there, but quite honestly, my ability to output content that can be consumed by executives is a direct result of my ability to validate my reduction in risk through the tools that I employ. Now, continuous validation is an interesting thing. There are many products on the market that sort of live in this space. All the big players will offer you one, and there's a ton of small players who are great. There are a few that absolutely stand out. Once again, I'm not affiliated in any way, shape, or form, but I personally am a big fan of Attack IQ. I use Attack IQ for things that I don't think they ever intended it to be used for, but I found that it helps me do the things that I need to do. It helps me to continuously validate. And I'll give you an example. I mean, Attack IQ is a simulated attack platform, right? Like you point it at things, you run scenarios, it tells you what's terrible and what's not terrible. But it produces very actionable intelligence. It produces these wonderful reports. It's tightly paired with the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and the MITRE ATT&CK framework is something not only that I've written about, but that I am insanely passionate about. I think it is one of the greatest evolutions in security frameworks in the last 22 years, which is how long I've been doing this. And once again, feel free to reach out and we can talk about that. But continuous validation doesn't only give me the ability to show my boss and show the board that, hey, look, our controls are buying down these particular risks, and these are things that we worry about. It's also an accountability engine. And what I mean by that is, my security organization lives within IT. And not only do we have to govern the entire enterprise as it relates to security and risk, but we have to essentially govern infrastructure and infrastructure management, the security associated with infrastructure. Now, anybody who's dealt with the traditional infrastructure team network, Windows, like whatever it is, you always struggle with patch management and vulnerability management and assessment. You're always spitting out report cards and handing it over to them and saying like, hey, you've got 2 million vulnerabilities in your environment that you need to manage. And you always wind up getting like, oh yeah, we've got a plan to fix that. Now I could say, okay, well, tell me what your plan is, and tell me when you think you're going to get that done. And when you tell me you've gotten it done, I will go and tell you whether or not you've done it successfully. And so I don't go on anyone's word. I don't just assume the next time I run Nessus or the next time next patch Tuesday comes around that I find out that we're a month behind. No, I'm just constantly running a tool that's telling me that somebody violated the promise they made to you to fix that thing. And to me, that is absolutely part of continuous validation. It's not only to see that my tools are doing what they're doing, but it's also that accountability engine that I use to make sure that the people who agreed to own risk and mitigate and buy it down are doing the things that they promised that they would do, essentially. And that's a huge thing to me. Now, I know I've been rambling quite a bit, and I see that people are chatting away or typing away questions, and there's quite a few. And so, you know, that's pretty much the gist of my slides. I did leave a slide for Q&A. And I think probably the most valuable part of this conversation will come from questions that people ask. So Jason, if you want to take a rip at it.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just going to stop sharing the screen here. So what I'll do is I'm going to give you a little bit of time to just catch up with the chat there, going back a little bit to the top. It eventually kind of caught up with what you were presenting about, but a lot of it was pertaining to this automation that you were talking about. So I'll let you catch up with some of that first, and then make a few comments. Whilst Pete is just catching up here, guys, he was just referencing Attack IQ. Coincidentally, they're actually going to be presenting tomorrow. So be sure to check it out. He obviously just gave them a pretty good reference. So actually they're going to be kicking off the conference tomorrow with a presentation, which will be pretty cool. How are you getting on with that chat box right there?
Yeah, I know there's some good comments in here.
Yes, Jeff, you can trust me, I promise you.
Let's see. So, you know, there are some things here that are somewhat validations of some of the things I've said that I will call out, because I agree with these things and being said in different ways and so on and so forth. You know, Michael said, you know, look to mature your processes before you buy tools. A good tool can't fix bad process. Could not agree more. And so just to build on that a tiny little bit, there is one thing from the past, from the security past, that I still believe in as proper structure. And that is, I structure my team in the same way that traditional security organizations have been structured. I have engineering, I have operations, I have GRC, right? And the reason I do it that way is because if you conceptualize how those three organizations move things left to right, you know, you're essentially talking about your GRC function or your risk function where processes are born and processes live and policies are developed, and risk is recorded and applied to a framework, and they're essentially passing that to your engineering organization who's building control and capability, who's then passing that functionality off to your operators who are producing the visibility and producing the data, who then feed that back to the risk people to slap back in the framework, and you just sort of have this life cycle going. Like, yes, without the process that ties all of that together, none of this matters. And that's me saying that. Like, Microsoft will convince you that I'm talking smack, like they'll solve all your problems for you. But and look, I don't hate Microsoft. I just feel like they oversell their solutions in a huge way, and you don't have to worry about process because you get it for free, quote unquote, blah blah blah. But anyway, yes, process will always set you free.
Well, that's so I'm going to jump in with a question there myself, because you kind of like touching upon something that I've heard spoken about a lot lately, and obviously they're going to try and sell you whatever they can do. Like, do you have any recommendations for people on how they can kind of like better manage vendors and make sure that they're kind of like actually have your best interests at heart the entire time versus their sales figures?
Yeah, and I think this varies based on who it is you're dealing with, right? You could tell right away. Well, I could tell right away. I think most people in the security space could tell right away. You know, when you sit down across the table with a vendor, you know, at least I can usually smell the sales pitch, you know, and separate that out from the stuff that is actually valuable. You know, Microsoft has no problem telling you that even all of their engineers are trained in sales and marketing. It's every one of them comes to the table with a sales pitch. You know, I always say right out of the gate, like, don't give me your sales pitch. I'm not here for you to try and sell me something. Like, you need to show me the money, like show me the functionality. And as a matter of fact, you've got money to burn. So give me the solution for X period of time and let me give it to my people to bang around with it and to compare against potentially some other things. Man, I'll even go compare your multi-million-dollar solution against what I can get from the open source community. And, you know, and I'll tell you what I come up with. And I will spend the time and I will spend the resources to know whether or not the solution you're trying to sell me is something that's worth my money. I'll do that with Microsoft all the way down to the tiny, you know, the Attack IQs of the world, which I absolutely did. And that's a major part of how I make my technology decisions.
Thank you for that. So question here from the audience then. So where does ROI fit into the choice of a cybersecurity tool? That's an interesting one, because ultimately return on investment is, well, you know, potentially bankruptcy for a company, right? But that's a very arbitrary thing to say. So yeah, opinion on ROI.
So I'm going to try and not to ruffle any feathers here. ROI is not a science. Return on investment is a narrative. Return on investment to the people who have to make financial decisions, i.e., either I give you this 6 figures or I don't. To them, all it is what am I going to get for what I spend? I mean, that is the simplest formula there is. I think we, as the professionals, owe it to the people who have to write the check to be able to give them the explanation that helps them feel good about the financial decision they're going to make. Now, I personally am I'm not recommending you go and lie to your executive and tell them, oh, everything's going to be great, just cut them the check. Obviously, that's not how ROI works. For me, like I said, and going through all the content that I put in those slides, for me, threat-informed defense and the understanding of what the risk is and the understanding of the reality associated with my ability to buy it down allows me to either tell that story in a way that I can sleep at night with or not tell that story at all, quite honestly. There are plenty of products that I really, really want, but I know that they're probably not going to buy me the things that are really going to help my executives feel good about the fact that they spent that kind of money, because they might be data-driven, or they might be threat intelligence tools, or there might be things that are sort of ancillary to the goal that I want to give my operators to enhance their picture. I want to give my risk people to make their lives easier in managing the data and the frameworks that they have to manage. Those things are great, but when it comes that thing versus this thing over here that is literally going to give me the lightsaber by which to cut down risk, like I will make that trade-off every single time. And the people hate it, but they also understand it. You know, they get the reason why we exist and why we're employed, and they understand the mission. And I think ROI is really is the best bang for the buck concept, not only for the exec, but for the team and for the people outside your team and for the organization and so on and so forth. That's my philosophy.
Yeah, love it. Okay, well, a bit of a follow-up question to that as well then would be, I suppose, so you talk about ROI, ultimately the person that's judging the return on investment is the business itself. How does kind of assessing this technology require on a business that supports security versus kind of like just sees it as this necessary evil?
Well, I can tell you flat out, my board and my executives are some of the most skeptical people there are when it comes to cybersecurity. Like all this stuff that shows up in the news, they kind of brush it away. It's just the media, blah, blah, blah. And so, you know, I think in a lot of places you can sort of just collect all the news clippings and say, oh my God, look what's going on in the world. Like, if we don't do something about this, we're doomed. Whereas I think in my situation, I really need to leverage frameworks to say, here's where we think we are, and get you, the person who has to sign the check, to agree that that's something you can relate to and understand and believe in. And I need to collect evidence from the organization, and I need to show it in a way that's practical and consumable. And then I need to be able to say, with this investment, I can buy this down in very specific terms. And then 6 months down the road or a year down the road or whatever it is, I need to come back to the table and say, you know, I told you so. Like, you did this, we made this investment, look what we were able to do with it. And based on the framework that you've seen a million times before, here's where I can show you very specific reductions in risk. I think, to me anyway, that's the only way. This is a data-driven way to say, here's where we are, here's where we want to go. And at some point in time, I can show you that we got there or are getting there. That's my approach to it.
Great. Question from the audience. What would you recommend organizations on implementing automated security controls within your CI/CD pipeline / DevSecOps? Yeah,
so we do it. I think this is, I mean, just to explain kind of where technology is at DFA in a sort of very high level. You know, DFA is a 40-year-old company. Its IT organization has maybe existed for less than half of that. Its security organization is going on 4 years old, believe it or not. And that security organization, even though I've only been there going on 2 years, we've completely transformed the approach to cybersecurity by bringing people into the organization who have lived lives in the DevSecOps space and so on and so forth, and to understand that the pipeline is the perfect place to inject security control or detection and prevention. And so, we're actually in the process of building our CI/CD pipeline for our app dev teams. And, we're already putting automated static and dynamic code assessments in there. We're already putting automated dependency management and tracking bits in that pipeline, all run out of my team. We're building remediation plans and integrating this into our vulnerability management play. I think that is a not only a critical component of a proper CI/CD DevOps structure. It is probably the best, highest return from a risk management standpoint for you to put security capabilities, in my opinion. The shift left concept, while I hate saying that term because it's become one of those buzz terms, I could not agree with more. It is absolutely security first is the way to do things, in my opinion.
Fantastic. Well, Tanwe, who asked the question, just agreed with that statement with sold.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Another question. Obviously, you've been very forthcoming in some of your assessment of some of the vendors out there. Have you ever looked at Tanium? If so, what's your opinion, as many banks use it?
I saw Tanium in a demo a long time ago. I don't think I ever really got to get a full taste of it because this was sort of towards the end of a year, and this was during a bad couple of years in the financial world, and the budget kind of got slashed, and so it wound up coming off the table, and I never really revisited it. I've heard good things about it, but that doesn't carry any water, quite honestly, for me. If I had the opportunity to reevaluate it at some point in time, I likely would, because I know they've been around for a while. But man, that's a space with so many competitors. I'm awake, but already losing sleep, even thinking about how I would go around doing an evaluation in that space, quite honestly.
Is there an easy way to define risk appetite?
Any way to define risk appetite? So this is going to be highly dependent on how your enterprise is constructed. And what I mean by that is, I'm kind of lucky because enterprise risk management and information security risk management are two separate entities in this organization. And we have a direct relationship where we can essentially say, here's risk the way we look at it. Now you need to go consume that and say, okay, we understand that risk this is the way we look at it. And we ultimately push that accountability out to enterprise risk to say, it's up to you to make the determination on what's acceptable and not acceptable. Now, obviously there's levels there. Within technology, risk appetite, when you talk about risk appetite within the realm of a technology organization, this is always going to be, to me anyway, a universal struggle, and that universal struggle is essentially security versus operational capability. You ramp up security, you reduce operational capability, and finding that balance has always been the thing, at least the way I've seen it. I think determining risk appetite as it relates to your ability to manage risk within a technology organization has everything to do with the relationship that your team has with the rest of the technology organization, in understanding that any decision that gets made that has anything to do with the increase or decrease or mitigation or reduction of risk has to be had through the lens of operational efficiency. Because at the end of the day, I am still here to serve the business, and that means I can't go blow up the trade pipeline just because I want to put this control in place to keep somebody from doing something stupid. That's how I look at it. I know I keep saying that at the end of everything, but I just want to.
No, that's perfect. It's your exactly no, exactly. So final question that I have for you, it would be really, are there any kind of other up and coming vendors out there that you've looked at that you thought are pretty cool that might be actually disrupting and helping and making some noise?
I really like, man, I don't even know if I should be doing this. I really like Reciprocity Labs. So they make a product called Zen GRC. Anyone who is subject to SOC 1 audits knows that can be, it can be super easy if you get it right. It can be soul draining if you don't get it super right. We spend ridiculous amounts of time going through SOC won audits because of the amount of covered systems that we have and the amount of regulators we have to deal with because we do business around the world. You know, Zen's risk management platform has great APIs. It's got great automation capabilities built into it. It's got the ability to manage third parties. It's just a really great tool. Bang for the buck, it's cheaper than dirt, in my opinion. You know, if you're running a GRC organization that's responsible for third-party risk and audit, I think it's a great tool. That said, on the open source side of that is a tool called Iramba, which is tiny, which gives a lot of that capability for, you know, one tenth the cost. It just requires a bit more work on your own end. Outside of that, like I already said, I'm a big fan of Attack IQ. You know, they're still relatively new. I think they, you know, the attack simulation platform is an attack simulation platform. For leveraging a framework, and we know what all the bad things are out there, then you can automate all that stuff away and you can build that framework. But that company is solid as hell. Their customer service is amazing. I've never had a problem getting in touch with somebody there. I think they just have an amazing head on their shoulders, and I think they are one of the best players in that space, in my opinion. I know that sounds like an endorsement, and I guess it is, but I use it. I think it's great. I've tried the other ones and wasn't really a fan for a number of reasons. I think that's a great one. And quite honestly, other than that, I'm very much a best of breed kind of buyer. I'm not a converged platform buyer, but I do buy what I know and what I have exposure to and what I've dealt with in my past. We do our due diligence and we do our bake-offs against emerging technologies and so on and so forth. But when you got 15 years of experience under your belt and you've stayed with technology, it's kind of hard to say no to something like that when you just know it works. And so you can imagine what some of those vendors are, but we tend to use them. Oh, and a shout out to Recorded Future if you're into the threat intel space. I think some of the stuff, talk about a pivot, man, like some of the stuff that they do is impressive to say the least, from just threat intelligence aggregation to third-party risk management to executive protection type stuff. Like they do it all. It's an amazing product. I feel like they've been around for a while. They've made ripples. They'll continue to make ripples. I just think it's a great product. But once again, that's my opinion.
No, it's greatly appreciated. You know, you say about endorsing and stuff. Hey, it resonates far more with people when it comes from your mouth versus what we've spoken about seeing across what the Jeff strain called critter speech, sales critter speech. So, right, it's far better that way. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Just join me in a virtual round of applause with Pete. Thank you so much for your candid insight. Really greatly appreciate it. Love those types of sessions. Thank you.